Railroads run on parallel ribbons of steel, but the miracle iron and carbon combination which makes this and much of our modern world possible simply would not happen if the raw materials could not make it to the mill. The Lake Superior region of the Great Lakes is home to some of the most productive iron ore deposits in the world. The Missabe and Marquette iron ranges combine for the vast majority of U.S. iron ore production, and almost all of it rides to Lake Superior by rail and then hits the water for transport by the majestic ships which sail on the great inland seas. At Sault Ste Marie, the Algoma Steel Mill is located right at the heart of the iron ore shipping trade, just up the St. Mary's River from the Soo Locks, through which the iron ore boats pass down from Lake Superior. Yet the Algoma Mill receives much of its ore by the all-rail route, ore that never floats. Originating at the Cleveland Cliffs Tilden Mine in the Marquette Iron Range, Canadian National teams up with the Lake Superior and Ishpeming to furnish between 45 and 70 iron ore hoppers daily year-round, while the lake freighters are forced to lay up each winter. The 155-mile haul, as the crow flies, takes the ore on a ride with 4 different trains in a continual round-the-clock railroad iron ore conveyor belt we will examine in this edition of Pure Michigan Trains, presented by the Thornapple River Rail Series. Just after noon Eastern Time, the CN 2941 is coaxed into movement by the engineer. They're just pulling out of the yard in Gladstone, with the rear mixed freight still back in the yard, behind nearly a mile of iron ore hoppers forwarded by the U-745. Picking up where the U-745 terminates, this is the L-551, the daily Green Bay, Wisconsin to Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario road freight, which east of Gladstone handles the all-rail ore shuttle movement. Behind the iron ore, a cut of mixed freight follows along, most of it also destined for the Algoma Steel Works, principally to carry away the finished products. By now it should be clear that there is typically only a single unit on the head end of this train, a result of weight restrictions on the bridge at Sault Ste. Marie. Thus the lead locomotive is followed by a handful of empty buffer cars, then the iron ore, more buffers, and finally the second unit running in distributed power mode. The use of distributed power generally dictates that only newer GE and EMD locomotives are used on this train, so the power is typically quite consistent. At Rapid River, both the Rapid and Whitefish rivers are crossed, rounding the north end of the Little Bay de Noc. Just beyond the village, US Highway 2 flies over the railroad, offering one of the few overhead vantage points available on this line as the heavy train battles the hill out of the immediate vicinity of Lake Michigan. With a wintertime load of 70 iron ore cars and plenty of mixed freight on the bottom of the consist, this is one of the few places we'll be able to see the whole train on its journey to the Soo. Ensign is the second siding out of Gladstone, and also features a largely abandoned pulpwood loadout yard, the spur for which heads off to the left here. The colder temperatures of wintertime test the strength of rail as it shrinks, subjecting it to many tons of tension force along its length. This huge load is sometimes enough to snap the rail or pull apart a joint, which must be repaired by the track maintenance department. This morning, a track inspector found a broken rail here, so before the L551 can pass, the track maintainers are fixing the spot with new joint bars over the broken spot. Using their high rail truck's onboard hydraulic pump and tools, they make quick work of drilling out the bolt holes and then tightening in the new joint bars, getting the track back into serviceable condition. Once they were off the track and in the clear, the maintainers release their track authority and prepare to give the train a roll-by, wherein they visually inspect the train for defects. They'll watch to make certain that all of the brakes are released and nothing is dragging, both conditions which could damage equipment or even cause a derailment. Here at Nama Junction, a diamond once allowed the Nama and Northern Logging Railroad to cross the Soo Line, Maine. Once measuring over 75 miles in length and operating a half-dozen steam engines, the logging road helped the sawmill at its namesake port process over 2.5 billion board feet of lumber between 1881 and 1951. Approaching Isabella, the tracks round the swampy marsh at the south end of Moss Lake. A quick rise out of the sink gives the railroad a roller coaster-like appearance, but is easily handled by the twin GE Evolution Series locomotives on today's train. The Upper Peninsula is, of course, quite a rural area, so most crossings are simple passive crossbuck and stop sign affairs. More recently, the blue dot tags have shown up, offering motorists and passersby a direct hotline to the railroad in case of any problems. The small town of Cook still has a U.S. post office, but recently lost its siding along the CN main line. Too short to be of much utility, and with longer sidings available at Isabella and Majestic, the turnouts were pulled out, which will save on maintenance costs and provide additional spare parts for use elsewhere. The city of Majestic is the largest settlement between Gladstone and the Soo, thanks in large part to the large river of the same name, making it a great lumbering hub back in the day. Once upon a time, railcar ferries even operated from the port to the lower peninsula, carrying all sorts of forestry products south and manufactured goods north. Today, UP Papers still operates a paper mill along the river, and the large passenger and freight depot remains in use by the track and signal departments. At the eastern limit of town, US 2 again flies over the railroad, with the eastward trains again on the climb out of the river valley. At Gulliver, this edition of the L551 shows off just how much snow trains are capable of whipping up, even at a paltry 25-mile-per-hour cruise. The further east one travels on the majestic sub, the more frequently one finds jointed rail. While much of the line has received continuously welded rail over the years, many stretches remain with the traditional 39-foot sticks, producing the classic clickety-clack rhythms. 2.5 miles further to the east, the lazy Mellicokins River is bridged by this combination timber pile and steel girder bridge. Timber is ultimately a very elastic building material, especially when considering the weight of fully loaded rail cars, so it is easy to observe the movement of the bridge under load. Gilchrist is the longest passing siding between Gladstone and the Soo, so it is a popular meeting point between the L551 and local L544. The L544 and its counterpart L543 perform all of the local switching work between Gladstone and Sault Ste. Marie, while the L550 and L551 perform no local work. They run opposite schedules to the road trains to allow for easy planned meets, such as the case today. With several pulpwood loadouts and the interchange with the Newberry subdivision at Trout Lake, the L543 is unsurprisingly loaded down with plenty of wood as they stop to throw their way into the siding. With the turnout restored for mainline movement, the L551 gets the go-ahead to proceed onwards. Caffey is one of the busiest pulpwood transloads in the Upper Peninsula. Here, the increased speed and fresh snow allow the train to create its own blizzard, backlit by the sun to impressive visual effect. Trout Lake was born as a railroad town as the meeting point between the Marquette to St. Ignace DSS&A main line and the Soo Line main we've been following. The large station building was constructed right on the diamond to serve customers on both lines. Eventually, the termination of the railcar ferry at St. Ignace led to the abandonment of the line south of Trout Lake, leaving only one through route. The switch here is thus the contemporary start of the now branch line DSSA, which now runs only as far as Munising as the Newberry subdivision. The sounds of spring were in the air at Fiberon this evening, with the L551 trundling down on the long segment of tangent track over the jointed rail. The North Pine River cut an impressive little gorge here in what is now Rudyard, spanned by this impressive deck girder bridge. Another day, the rails glinted with the last rays of sunshine as the L551 briefly interrupted the rural peacefulness in this village of 1,300 inhabitants. Kinross, the siding is used today for pulpwood loading, while the jointed rail on the main track gets the ground shaking quite a bit thanks to the soft spring soil conditions. At Dafter, the eastbound run is coming to a close on the final descent into the Soo. In just a few minutes, they'll be rolling up to the bridge approach, preparing for the customs check before proceeding over the river into Canada. Sault Ste Marie is one of the oldest cities on the continent, first settled by the French in 1668 by none other than Father Marquette, a Jesuit missionary who many locations around the Great Lakes can claim as their namesake. Water has always been the primary transportation method in the Soo, with today's 1,000-foot-long lake freighters being no exception. Seen here, the Missabe miner is downbound with around 60,000 tons of iron ore from Minnesota, having just transited through the Soo Locks. While the river made for easy maritime navigation aside from the rapids, the mile-wide channel posed significant hurdles to railroad bridge construction, especially on the part of providing movable bridges for both the American and Canadian locks around the rapids. Typically left in the raised position for ship traffic, the mammoth lift bridge is gently lowered into place just before the train crosses over the river, controlled by a bridge tender who occupies the tower on the north side of the channel. The signals here are the only active railroad signals in the Upper Peninsula outside of the LS&I, guiding the 2 trains per day over the bridge by verifying everything is locked into place. The history of the bridges here is as unique as the bridges themselves. The original bridge from 1887 featured 10 camelback truss spans over the main river channel above the rapids, spans which recently received hundreds of tons of new steel to strengthen and renew them for continued service. In 1895, the existing swing bridge over the Canadian Lock Channel was constructed, while in 1910 the double-leaf bascule span was constructed over the Davis and Sabin Lock channels on the American side. This structure remains the longest of its kind in the world and certainly significant in its use for railroad operations. However, as the Davis and Sabin locks are currently indefinitely out of service, this bridge rarely operates as of 2019. By 1959, the project to expand the Poe Lock required a new vertical lift bridge, replacing an earlier swing span which became a hazard to navigation. A unique challenge to this new bridge was its proximity to the bascule bridge counterweight structure, which required most of the narrow 100-foot wide pier to operate. Thus, engineers built the north tower around the bascule counterweight, leaving out a few cross braces and hanging the lift span counterweights on the outside corners of each tower. Beyond the 3 movable bridges employed to cross the river, 3 additional deck girder bridges fly the railroad over the U.S. and Canadian hydropower intake channels, along with Pier Drive here on the American side. This makes for a grand total of 7 distinct bridges in this single mile of railroad, each of a different design. As soon as the rear end of the train has finished crossing the ship canal, the bridge tender gets his span on the move back into the sky, out of the way of shipping traffic until the next train requires its presence in the lowered position. On the opposite side of the river, the large steel mill buildings of the Algoma Works produce a consistent industrial background noise as they churn out finished steel for any number of imaginable uses. Within a couple of hours, the train headed in the other direction, the L550, will be ready to cross back over into the United States, exchanging the fresh iron ore for empties back en route to Tilden, and loaded steel coils and other mixed freight headed back for Gladstone. And that'll do it for this edition of Pure Michigan Trains presented by the Thornapple River Rail Series. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more railroading from this channel, as well as leave any questions down in the comments below.